great to be here with you today. And as Lucy mentioned, I'm also running the session next week on re-engaging with your audiences. So the two sessions are very much linked, and hopefully you can join us in both of those today and next Tuesday. So just to talk you through what I'd like to cover today, I'm just going to touch on what's marketing and why it's important. And I'm sure it'll just be quite obvious and a refresher to many of you, but I'm aware that a lot of you probably at slightly different stages and maybe different experience when it comes to your marketing. So I think it's good to start there. I'll also be talking a bit about vision and mission and why it's really important to ground your marketing in those really important statements that hopefully you all have. I'll then take you through a strategic framework. So it'll be 5 very clear steps that you can use when it comes to your marketing strategy, whether you're writing a new one or you're just refreshing maybe something you already have and adapting it for these very turbulent times. And then at the end, talk a bit about marketing in a COVID-19 world, a post-COVID-19 world, and a kind of just 2020 and beyond world, because the year has really impacted so much on all aspects of our lives, and that includes marketing, our approaches, and what we do. So there will be a 5-minute sort of leg stretch and break halfway through. There'll be a few different exercises for you all to do as well. And you'll be sent the slides as well as a handout with some extra links on after the session as well. So the takeaways from today, hopefully you'll find some clarity on how your purpose and your mission and vision will inform your marketing planning. You'll get some tools and frameworks to structure your marketing planning, and some insight into how to make your planning smart, which I'll talk a bit more about later on, and agile, really, to respond to a period of disruption. So just to kick off then, what is marketing? I think there's a common misconception that marketing is the same as maybe sales or selling or publicity or promotion. Often those words are used quite interchangeably. Really, marketing is a lot more than that. So the Chartered Institute of Marketing's definition is the management process responsible for identifying, anticipating, and satisfying customer requirements profitably. So you can see from that that it is really much more than just promoting or communicating to your customers, or maybe in the case of museums, you'd call them your audiences or visitors. So it starts a lot earlier, really, identifying who they are, anticipating what their needs are, so getting to know them, understanding their needs, their behaviours, and satisfying their requirements, so really meeting that demand. Now, the Chartered Institute of Marketing's definition talks about doing that profitably. That's not always as simple when it comes to arts marketing, but certainly you don't want to be making a loss. So marketing can involve things like understanding who your competitors are, the context you operate in, identifying and understanding your audiences, making sure that you're providing something that there is a demand for, that people out there want and value, and then reaching and communicating to your audiences, and also really engaging them and ideally retaining their customers so they come back and also they tell other people about you. So marketing is really closely linked to audience development, and for some organisations actually the terms arts marketing and audience development are quite interchangeably used. If that's something you're interested in, I've got a link in the handout pack to a really amazing article on the Arts Marketing Association's Culture Hive website, which explores those two terms and their areas of overlap and differentiation. So why is marketing important? Firstly, it is mentioned once in museums accreditation guidance. So it is part of the accreditation standard explicitly, to communicate effectively with users and potential users through a range of access, marketing and promotional activities. But aside from that, it obviously also supports your business and forward planning, your income generation and financial sustainability, which are also part of museums accreditation. And also it's necessary for you to understand and develop your audiences, which is also part of the accreditation. But more than that, I think really why marketing is important is these are just some of the things that I've jotted down here, and you might have other things to add. So it helps you understand your audiences, ensures there's that demand for what you put out, helps you develop relationships, builds trust, helps you respond to changes, because if you are doing your research and looking at your competitors and looking at the environment around you, you can adapt accordingly. It can help give you a competitive advantage, so stand out from your competitors, generate brand awareness, it helps build authority and credibility, Ultimately, which is I think what everyone really wants and needs, it drives the visits, it drives the participation, drives the engagement, and generates income and donations. So hopefully I've sold marketing to you as something that it's worthwhile to invest in, both some sort of time and money. So I wanted just us to reflect a bit about mission and vision as a starting point for marketing, because if your marketing flows from this, if your marketing is really anchored in your mission, your vision, your purpose, it really helps to ensure that your marketing is more relevant, it's more efficient, it's a lot clearer for both internal teams and also your external audiences and stakeholders what you're about. So just as a bit of a refresher probably for most of you, a definition and then an example of mission and vision. So definition, if you think about vision or a vision statement, it's really that desired end state, what you're aiming for over a longer term, a longer period of time. It's generally really aspirational, it's ambitious, it's motivational, and action or change oriented. So something should be happening in order for that vision to take place, for you to achieve that vision. And ultimately, it's what the world or the future looks like if you achieve your mission. The mission is really what drives the organisation. So the organisation's reason for existing, and it should drive and guide your decisions, your priorities, and your actions. And it's really interesting because I was thinking about an example, which example to talk you through, and I went back on some previous notes I had from a few years ago and actually then revisited them and found this example from the Natural History Museum, which has actually, if I now look on their website, it's been updated. So I'm going to talk you through the two versions of their mission and vision statement, because I think a really good example of how there's been a shift in the last few years thinking about mission and vision, moving towards really having societal impact rather than just explaining your operations. So back in 2014, their vision was to advance our knowledge of the natural world, inspiring better care of our planet. And their mission, to maintain and develop our collections and use them to promote the discovery, understanding, responsible use and enjoyment of the natural world. It was a bit more operational focused, and that's something that I think certainly a few years ago we saw a lot with museums. Their mission was to preserve their collections first and foremost. If you look at the website now, the Natural History Museum says our vision is of a future where both people and planet thrive, and our mission is to create advocates for the planet. It's quite a nice example to see how their mission and vision have evolved over the last few years, and ultimately I think a really good examples of how those statements should be really clear, memorable, relevant and concise, and certainly that this is a great example of, you know, being change oriented and aspirational and motivational. So a lot has happened this year, and I think museums have done an absolutely incredible job in adapting, in innovating, having to change with the times, but also a lot of it has just been about survival and trying to get through it. And a lot of work has been quite reactive. So I think now's a really good time to take a step back and just really reflect on what you've been doing and how and whether or not that really ties in with your mission, your vision, your purpose. Because then when you're thinking about 2021, you can make adjustments accordingly. So if you think about your core purpose, mission and vision, it'd be interesting to think about, okay, so pre-coronavirus, how would you normally serve these? What would you normally do and deliver to try to meet your mission and your vision? And then think about, okay, well, how have we been serving these the past 7 months? Because that might very well be quite different to a year ago. And think about, are any of the activities you're doing currently, are they leading to mission drift? And mission drift is really what it says on the tin. So when your actions start drifting away from that original mission. Now, it might be that they are drifting away, and it might be that they're not. But it's interesting to think about, okay, if they are drifting away, are they things that you want to continue with in next year? So is there a reason that you've done them this year? I mean, I've seen loads of museums, they have been really re-energized this year and got back to basics, really thought about their purpose and how they can help their local community, what they can do for society more generally. And it feels like the sort of trauma of this year has really re-energized their activity and their work. So it might be that a lot of the things you're doing this year, you do want to carry forward. It might also be that you find that there are gaps. So by focusing on some things over the last few months, there are some things that kind of fallen off the radar and dropped off the list. So are there other things that you want to, or you need to get back on to-do list in order to really meet your vision and mission? And then finally, you could even reflect on, actually, are our mission statement and vision statement, are they still relevant and appropriate, or actually have things been thrown up so radically and you've really been reevaluating what you're doing, that actually it's time to take a bit of a step back and just reevaluate whether you need to go back to the drawing board when it comes to your mission and vision. So I thought it'd be interesting just to ask you all whether you feel that your organisations have drifted away from their original mission over the past few months. And there's no right or wrong answer and there's no judgment, but I've got a little poll here which it'd be great if you could take part in. So if you're either on your mobile phones or on your desktop browsers, go to the website www.menti.com. You should be asked to type in a 6-digit number, and if you type in the number that's on the slide there, 341501, it should take you to this poll. And if technology plays ball with us today, once you start answering yes, no, or not sure, we should be able to see your responses live. So we'll give that, oh, excellent, it's working. Okay, so I'll just give you sort of a minute just to get onto menti.com and we'll just see if we can get a few more responses in. So it's a real mixed bag coming through. Very, very even actually in terms of numbers, yes, no, and not sure. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I think, you know, if this is something that strikes a bit of a chord with you, I think it could be worth you as an organisation, you know, with colleagues, just taking that step back and reflecting on your mission and vision, and to what extent you want to revisit that, to what extent you need to just start going through what you've been doing and deciding if those actions are still relevant for next year or not. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in that poll. Are there any questions on anything that I've talked about so far before I go on to talk about a marketing strategy framework? Realise the screen stopped sharing, sorry, 2 seconds. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen again. So I'm going to talk you through 5 steps in the framework that you can use when you're either developing a new marketing strategy, or if you just want to revisit what you're doing. And I would say that a marketing strategy for people who haven't got a marketing background can sound really intimidating, but I don't think it has to be. You know, just break it down into these 5 steps, have a little think about each, and just apply that logic throughout. And I would say, you know, do what's relevant to you and to your organisation. If you're going for a sort of 2 million capital funded project, then you might have to do a lot more research and your marketing strategy should be a bit thicker. But actually, if it's just something you're doing as an internal document to give you a bit of a guide and a steer on your marketing, then actually, you know, 2-3 pages of bullet points may really suffice. So it doesn't have to be really, really onerous. So the first step I'm going to talk you through is just a situational analysis. So doing some research to say, where are we now? The second one will be goals and objectives. Where are we going? Then the third will be your strategy and approach, thinking about how we're going to get there. Fourth, your actions and resources. What are we going to do to get there? And then 5, evaluation. How will we know if we've got there? So firstly, situational analysis, where are we now? That's really just a bit of research and analysis to start thinking about, okay, where are you now? Gathering some information to try to help you base your decisions on, really, so that you're basing your decisions on data and information and facts. You might want to do things like consider and summarise your mission and vision statement. If your museum's got a forward plan, organisational goals, business goals, your museum's values. Talk a bit about your organisation's people, so who are the staff or the volunteers who might be involved in your marketing. Also, any research, consultation you've got on who your visitors are, the profile of your audiences, and also non-users, perhaps, if you've got any consultation or data on them. Who your target audiences are, and then also doing a bit of an audit of your marketing and promotion channels as they currently stand. So what activities are you doing? What budget do you have? What results do you have? And also thinking a bit about your competitors. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of models that you can use that you might find useful when it comes to doing some situational analysis. The first one, I imagine a lot of you will be familiar with, it's a SWOT analysis. So essentially, you look at internal strengths and weaknesses, and then external opportunities and threats that might impact your marketing. So if it's going in a marketing strategy, really have the discipline to think about, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses that relate to marketing? What are the opportunities and threats that might relate to our marketing? Some of you may also be familiar with the steeple analysis. There's a shorter version called the PEST analysis. There's also a middle version called a PESTEL or PESTEL analysis. There's all sorts of ones, but basically, they set out a list of factors that might affect the external environment, so that might create opportunities or threats for your organisation. And they can be quite a good prompt just to help you think about what sorts of opportunities and threats you might face. So sociological, technological issues, economic issues, environmental issues, political, legal and ethical. So if you're doing a SWOT analysis, you look at the strengths and weaknesses from within your organisation, and then you might find that this helps you, prompts you to think about some opportunities and threats that might affect you. So as an example, here we've got an example museum. Their strengths might include really committed and passionate volunteers, and they have a strong reputation for delivering community outreach. But weaknesses might be that they have no real digital marketing expertise and no in-house marketing staff. And then opportunities, which I've here sort of tallied up with just to give you an example of how you can use the steeple analysis. So a sociological one might be that you could capitalise on the trend for staycation, so people from the UK holidaying within the UK. An environmental one, an opportunity could be improving your green credentials. There's recovery funding, uncertainty over the impact of Brexit and COVID-19 restrictions, I think would be quite prominent threats for most people at the minute. An economic factor, you know, a recession that might hit your income and also visitors and their ability to spend. So you don't have to cover all these 7 categories when it comes to thinking about your opportunities and threats, but it's worth just considering which ones are most relevant to you. And then another part of your situational analysis you could do is do a bit of a competitor analysis, thinking about who your competitors are. And I think it can be easy for a museum to think, well, I don't really have any, because if you're an industrial heritage museum in town, you might say, well, there are no other industrial heritage museums in our town, or even within a 1-hour drive time, for example, from us. So think a bit more broadly when it comes to who your competitors might be. Who are you competing against for your audience's attention, their money and their time? So it might be that, you know, if you're a family attraction, you'll actually need to think not just about other family museums in the area, but other things that families might do. So it could be a theme park, it could be a play area, it could be going to the cinema, going to the library. You're competing against all those other organisations when it comes to those families' money and time and attention. So how do your target audiences view you in comparison to your competitors? And what makes you distinctive to them? So what's your unique selling point? What makes you special? What makes you stand out? So is it that you offer really good value for money? You're a lot cheaper than a family ticket to the cinema, for example. Is it also that perhaps you offer something stimulating, something educational, or a really good rainy day activity, which, you know, the park doesn't offer something for all ages. You know, what is it that you offer that those other things don't? You might find this model useful as well, just to help you think about what your competitors offer and do well, what you do well, but then also really going back and honing in on what your target audiences want. So if you think about what you do well and what your competitors do well, this overlap area in the middle, you want to avoid really competing with, because as you can see from the Venn diagram, your target audiences don't want that. So there's no point in doing something and competing with competitors on something there's no demand for. Similarly, you want to avoid this area here, because that is what your audience wants and there is a demand for, and your competitors are doing well, but not you. Now, the spot in the middle, by all means, go there, but there's quite a competitive area because you're doing it well and your competitors are doing well. So if you can, see if there's an area, there's a sort of sweet spot here that you can identify where there's something that you do well and you can offer that there is demand from your target audiences for, but perhaps those competitors of yours aren't offering. So I just wanted to pause there and see if there are any questions. Lucy, I can't currently see the chat, so if there are any questions, do you mind just...
I will, yeah. There's nothing in the chat at the moment, but do feel free to pop your questions in there.
Okay, thank you. So what I thought I'd ask you to do then is pick one of those two models that I just talked you through, and I'll pop them on the next slide just as a refresher. So we've got the SWOT and the steeple analysis, or that competitor advantage Venn diagram. And just think about using maybe one that maybe you haven't come across one before, you think you want to refresh what you've written already in your SWOT analysis in the museum, for example, to take account of COVID-19. Just have a bit of a go. So pick one of them, and I'll give you, let's see, I'll give you sort of 3, 4, 5 minutes just to, on your own, just to start using one of those models, just jot down a few ideas, because I think it's really useful to just have a bit of a go and get the thinking going in the training session, just to get the ball rolling. So I'll put the two models up on this slide, and if you just want to sort of sit on your own and just jot a few ideas down, and in the meantime, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll just give you one more minute just to sort of finish any notes you want to make on that. Excellent. Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts on either of the models, any reflections they want to share with everyone else, or any questions about that before we move on? Okay, well, we'll keep going then. So the good news is now that you're well on the way of step 1 of the framework. So step 2, goals and objectives, where are we going? So I just wanted to talk a bit about the difference between a marketing goal and an objective. They're often used interchangeably, but they differ slightly. So really, a goal is a desired outcome you want to achieve, typically a bit broader, and typically over a sort of slightly longer period of time. You want it to back up and support your mission, your business goals, and really be based on the findings that you made in your situational analysis. So a few examples of a marketing goal could be to increase the number of visitors who return within a year, to attract more young families, to increase income that's generated from events, or to increase the reach of our digital channels. So objectives, on the other hand, they're really a target that you will work towards, and they should be SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-framed, which I'll cover in a bit more detail on the next slide, and they will help you to meet your goals. So think of them as really targets that you will aim to meet in order for your goals and aims to be met. So as an example, the goal to increase the reach of our digital channels, you might break that down into several objectives. So it could be to sign up 500 new subscribers to our e-newsletter during 2021. It could be to increase our Facebook followers by 10% next year, or to increase new users to our website by 10% during 2021. So if you have a series of marketing goals, then it's a great discipline to take each one and break it down to think, okay, this is what we want to aim towards. What are the targets we're going to set ourselves? How are we going to break those down, make them achievable in sort of small baby steps, really? So I mentioned that the objectives should be SMART, and I'm sure a lot of you, or maybe all of you, will be familiar with SMART objectives. They don't just apply to marketing. So you want them to be specific, so they need to detail what needs to be done. You want them to be measurable, so that you can measure the achievement or your progress. You want them to be achievable, so you want them to be realistic enough that you can achieve them if you push yourself, and also you want the team around you to accept them as realistic, because there's nothing more unmotivating really than ridiculously over-ambitious targets. But also you want them to be challenging enough to stretch you a bit. You know, there's no point in having an objective say you're going to get 5 new e-news subscribers next year. You want them to be relevant, so they really need to be worthwhile and important to your organisation and match those business goals you've got. And also there needs to be a really clear time frame for them, so that the time period for you to meet your target and your objective is clearly defined. So I've got three objectives here as an example that are not SMART, and I thought I could ask you to pop in the chat some suggestions on how you might be able to make them SMART. So the first one is to increase the number of people who have learnt about heritage. So has anyone got any thoughts on which of the 5 areas of the goals and objectives that's missing from that objective? So to increase the number of people who have learnt about heritage. Has anyone got any thoughts on how we could make that a bit more SMART, or what's missing from that, why it's not SMART? Someone's put specific. Yes. Increase the number by what percentage, or what is your baseline? What's your starting point? How many more people do you want to have learned about our heritage? Yes, Julia, really good point. How are you going to measure it? It's quite broad and vague. Yeah, and time, by when exactly? There's no starting point, no end date. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so number 2, to have a 1000% increase in visitors by March 2021. Any thoughts on how to make that smarter, or why it's not SMART as it currently is? Oh yeah, increase on what? I'm assuming that's with reference to maybe the current situation and lack of visitors. Too ambitious, yeah, or not achievable, yeah. There's also no sort of starting point on that. So in terms of when you're starting to measure from, you've got an end point, March 2021, but there's no starting point. Great. And then the last one, to have more website hits than the V&A. Any thoughts on that one? Achievable, yes, that is, I think, a bit overambitious, that one. Yeah, it'd be interesting, unless you've got a friend who works at the V&A who'd share their stats, you wouldn't be able to measure it. Relevance, that's a really good one from Polly as well. You know, why do you want to compete with the V&A? Why do you want or need more website hits from them, apart from maybe some kind of ego boost? And how many is more exactly? That's not being specified or quantified. Brilliant. Okay, that's really encouraging. It sounds like you're all quite familiar with SMART objectives and what they mean. So that's really, really good. I've just noticed actually there's a few comments back on the situational analysis. So that's great to see that a few people have mentioned the Venn diagram approach. Brilliant. That's really, really good. And yeah, SWOT analysis, totally different in light of COVID-19. Exactly. Really good point from Jan there. I think that's why it's so important to just see any kind of strategy document as a living and breathing document, you know, something that you refer to regularly and also that you update and take account of, and you kind of, it has to evolve as things change. Hopefully we'll never see a year where things are turned upside down in quite this extent, but you never know what's around the corner. So I totally agree that, you know, even the best laid plans, marketing strategies, objectives that anyone might have set in January, you know, they've obviously gone totally out the window. Okay, so I think, because we're doing quite well on time, I'll start to talk through about the strategy and approach just before we then move to a break. So you've got your goals and objectives, which is really important. And now the next part is the sort of thinking bit that's maybe slightly trickier, thinking about, okay, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? What's our approach? How are we going to meet those goals and objectives? So we talked about SWOT analysis before, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. It's sort of sometimes long lost, forgotten cousin is the TOES analysis, which essentially some people think that the SWOT analysis is a bit too passive and static, and it doesn't really show the interconnections between your internal strengths and weaknesses and the external opportunities and threats. So the idea behind the TOES analysis is really that you start to match your strengths and weaknesses with those opportunities and threats, and think about whether they are approaches that you might want to take. So for example, if you list your strengths up here, do you want to use your strengths to maximize any of the opportunities that are out there, or do you want to use your strengths to minimize the threats you're facing? Similarly, on the right-hand side, if you think about some of the weaknesses you might have identified, can you minimize them by taking advantage of opportunities? Or can you minimize weaknesses and totally avoid threats? So just as an example here, I've picked up on a few of the things I put in the example SWOT analysis earlier. So we've got strengths here. So we have a strong reputation for delivering community outreach. So how can you use that strength? Okay, so you've identified one of the opportunities is recovery funding. So could you apply for recovery funding to deliver more community outreach? So doing more of your strength to maximise that opportunity and really showcase your reputation and your credibility in community outreach in that funding application. Or think about your strength, how can that minimise or mitigate the threats you've identified here, which is the income drop from COVID-19. So can you develop ways to charge for the community engagement that you do to generate income, for example? So really maximising that strength in order to minimise that threat. On the right-hand column, we've got your weaknesses. So as an example, that you've got no digital marketing expertise. So can you use the opportunity, so you apply for recovery funding to minimise that weakness. So you apply for recovery funding to invest in training to upskill your team in digital marketing, for example. Or the threat, the income drop from COVID-19, can you focus on non-digital marketing to generate income? So you're you're sort of putting to one side that you don't have the digital marketing experience. You want to minimise that weakness, so you focus maybe on non-digital marketing to generate income to minimise the risk of that threat. I'd be really interested actually to hear if anyone's ever used the TOES analysis. So if anyone has experience of that and they have found it useful in the past, if they want to maybe drop a comment in the chat box, or if anyone's got any questions on that model, or any maybe reflections on whether you might like to use that if you've seen it for the first time before. Yeah, it's interesting. So if you like how it gives added value to SWOT, it gives SWOT more of a purpose. I think that is really the strength of it, because I think often we can do a SWOT analysis and then that just sits there. And I think this model helps you to really think about, okay, we've got these strengths and weaknesses, so what are we going to do about them? Which, what are we going to play to? Our strengths, do we need to minimise our weaknesses? And you can just play around with it a bit like that. So that's great to see that it sounds like that's sounding useful. So in this example, I've only put one strength, one weakness, one opportunity, and one threat. But if you were really going to be doing it back at your organisation, I'd recommend you put a few, really pull out the key ones. So the example, the sort of model here, the template, I've listed 4 of each. There's no magic number, just think about the key ones I think that will impact your organisation. I'd also really recommend, whether even if you're volunteer-led, or whether you have paid staff, several staff in your team, try to get other people involved in these sorts of thinking and models, because chances are members of your team will all come at them with slightly different takes and have different input and different experiences that will mesh and blend together really well. So, if you can involve other people, that's really great. Excellent. Okay, well, I think then my suggestion would be that if we break there and reconvene at 11:30 for the second half. So that gives us about, well, slightly more than 5 minutes. So you've got a bit more time to put that kettle on and stretch those legs and do the Wicks burpees or whatever Stephen was alluding to earlier. So if we reconvene at 11:30 and we'll pick up more on the strategy approach there.
Great, thanks, Christina.
I'll linger for a couple of minutes. So if anyone wants to pop any more questions in or comments in, I'll linger anyway. So.
Lots of thank yous in the chat, Christina, but no questions yet. I'll be back in 2 minutes, Christina.
Okay, I think we'll kick off again in just another minute's time.
There's a nice comment from Fred there, Christina. Don't know if you saw it, finding this useful and kind of talking about applying some of these models to different contexts.
Okay. So I think we'll kick off again then. So we've done about 2.5 out of the 5 steps so far. So just before the break, we talked about the TOES model and how that really helps further your thinking when it comes to your SWOT analysis. So there's one more model that I want to talk you through when it comes to thinking about your marketing strategy and approach. And it's really commonly used in marketing in all sorts of sectors and industries. I've slightly tweaked it to make it relevant as can be to museums. And it really helps you to think about what you offer and your audiences. So it's called the Ansoff Matrix, and some of you may well have come across that in other lines of work. But basically, across the top, you think about what products you offer. And I think sometimes it can sound a bit odd talking about products when it comes to museum. And I'm not talking about the products you sell in your shop. It's really the different things that you offer. So it could be your programming, your events. It could be your cafe. It could be shop. It could be the space hiring facilities. So that's what I mean kind of when I'm talking about your product. And then on the left, we've got your audiences. So thinking about both your existing audiences and your new audiences. And this matrix helps you think about whether when you're targeting your existing audiences and if you want to reach out to new audiences, whether it's enough to keep doing what you're doing or whether you need to actually develop new products or really do something quite different in order to get those new audiences in or to get more of the same visitors in or to get them to engage a bit deeper. So I'll talk you through it on this slide, and then the next slide, there's an example, and then we'll have the opportunity to split you all into breakout rooms where you can just have a few minutes just to reflect on the model with some of your colleagues in the session today. So firstly then, if we think about your audiences, okay, so we've got existing audiences. You want to get more of them visiting, or you want them to be visiting more frequently. So you can either keep doing what you're doing. So on the top here, we've got your existing products. So you're not really changing your product offering per se. So how then do you increase the visits, the amount of visits they make, or the amounts of purchases they make with your current products and programs? Or, so that's market penetration. Or you can think about, okay, you've got your existing audiences and you want more of them, more income from them, but you are going to develop a new product for them. So you're going to attract more of your current audiences or the same type of audiences with a new offer, giving them more reasons to return or engage in a deeper way. So on the bottom, so that's your existing audiences, but you might want to attract new audiences. And again, you can do that either by doing what you're currently doing, existing products and offers, or developing new ones. So to attract new audiences, but keep doing what you're doing is effectively called market extension. So you're attracting new audiences with your current products and programs. Or diversification, which is the last quarter in the model, which is when you're attracting new audiences with a new offer that meets their interests and needs. So you might already start to have ideas on, okay, when is it appropriate? When do you need to develop a new product? And actually, when can you just do something a bit more subtle or less costly, but still get some good results? So some examples here. So your existing audiences with your existing products, the market penetration quarter. So you're not changing, you're not developing anything new, but to get more visitors in, you might expand your opening hours. So you might, for example, start opening on a Sunday, or if you have a toddler activity that runs every fortnight, you could run that, or sorry, if it runs every month, you could run that every fortnight, so more frequently. You have already got temporary exhibitions and events lined up, and then you just promote them more to encourage the visitors to keep returning. Or you could initiate a loyalty scheme, and I'll come back to why that's in italics shortly. So that's without changing a lot. You might think that that's not enough, and actually you need to develop your product, you need to do new things to really excite visitors and to get those existing visitors to keep returning. It might be that you put on a new temporary exhibition specifically with the aim of getting more repeat visits. You could develop a new workshop or talk or activity aimed at your existing audiences. You could develop a new product such as a podcast so they can engage with you in different ways and engage more deeply with you. Or again, initiate a loyalty scheme. And the reason I put that in both and in italics is because you'll find there are probably some things that you could argue fit into either sort of category. So you could say, well, it's not a product, all it is a means to encouraging existing visitors to keep returning. So then it goes in the left-hand column. Or you could say, well, actually, like a friends scheme or a membership scheme is a product in itself. So you could argue that that is product development because it's a whole new package with new price points, and you have to give those members or friends something in return for their time and money. So on the bottom, we've got new audiences. So you might find that actually you don't need to do loads of new costly products to reach new audiences with your market extensions. So it might just be that you've done some research with non-users about how they perceive your museum, and actually you think some kind of marketing campaign which will help change their perceptions of the museum, or perhaps just raise awareness that you exist, that will be enough to attract new audiences in. Or you could run some kind of special offer, some kind of financial enticement incentive for them to visit, or do something like you promote an existing schools session. So you've already got the product, but you're promoting it and are trying to attract schools from a new geographic area, for example. And then the final one, the diversification, where you think actually to attract new audiences and visitors, we have to do something new and different. So maybe, again, you've got some research with them that really you think actually we need to appeal specifically for them and do something for them. It could be that you develop outreach events for care homes. I'm thinking pre-COVID-19, or perhaps do things like provide sensory kits or staff training, early opening for visitors who have special educational needs, or maybe want a quieter environment to visit. You could create a co-produced exhibition with community partners, or even do things like expand your catering offer. So you include vegan options or gluten-free options, which then might appeal to vegan visitors, for example. So doing something a bit more, well, a bit different to what you're currently doing. So are there any questions or reflections on the Ansoff Matrix before we split you into breakout groups? I'll just wait a few seconds to see if any comments come in the chat bar. So like I said, it can be a really useful model just to think about, okay, trying to match what you do with those audiences. And it will be something we pick up on again in the session next Tuesday as well, really thinking about who your audiences are currently, who you want them to be, your target audiences going forward. So I can't see any questions that have come through on the chat. So what we propose to do then is to split you into sort of randomly assigned breakout rooms of about 4 participants in each, just to give you the chance to reflect a bit on the Ansoff Matrix model. So just to discuss with your colleagues, because I would imagine that all of you have at some point done one of these, at least one of these 4 things, whether you call them whether you call that action market penetration, market extension, product development, or diversification or not. Chances are you haven't, but you probably at some point sat there and made a decision. Okay, we want to appeal to this type of audience group, therefore we are going to do X, Y, Z, for example. So just to chat with your colleagues about whether you can think of an example, a time in your museum when you've used one of the approaches of the Ansoff Matrix, whether you've called it that or not. And then also just to discuss a bit, do you have a sense of when it's appropriate to stick with existing products and offers and when you should develop new ones? So just to have a few minutes talking to colleagues about those two questions. So Lucy is kindly going to do the magic to split you into breakout rooms. So you should all get a notification, an invitation to join a breakout room, and we'll make sure that those questions are popped into the breakout rooms as well, so that they just can remind you of them. If you find that you've sort of finished the discussions on the Ansoff Matrix and you still have some time to spare, then you're very welcome to also talk to colleagues about the code analysis, for example, if that would be of use, and then we'll call you back in to the main room after about 8, 9, 10 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to start doing that now. Is anything happening for people? Are you getting put into breakout rooms or not? No. Okay. Sorry, people. Let me try this again. Is anything happening now? No. Okay, let me try one more thing. Sorry, everybody. I'm very sorry. I can't seem to get you into breakout rooms. It's I'm not going to go into the technicalities of why it won't let me put you into breakout rooms, but there seems to be a problem where it's only creating one massive breakout room, which is essentially where we all are at the moment. So, Christina, I'm really sorry about that. Is there a plan B where we might get people working to on their own and feeding back?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we start with the first question, I think someone had already started, someone had popped something in the chat. So, I mean, I'd be really interested to hear whether anyone's come across the Ansoff Matrix, and if so, if they find it, found it useful, or perhaps you have effectively done this sort of thinking without knowingly calling your thinking by that name, really. So if anyone wants to pop any responses in the chat, or if you want to use your raise your hand function just to verbally share with everyone, that would be really interesting. Yeah, Tom?
You should be able to unmute yourself, Tom.
Hello. Yeah, so last year we increased the price of the museum admission by 50p, a whole 50p. but then we said, you can come back as many times as you like through the rest of the year. So it was looking at existing customers and how to show them they're valued. And so we did that, but we hadn't actually called it anything, you know, like you did. So it's something we do without even realizing. So this is interesting. Interesting thing to do, to just try and classify what we're doing and try and just show, oh, we are doing that, but we're not doing this, and that's what that's called. So it's interesting to find out.
That can help you prioritize, and obviously if time and money is limited, you think, okay, well, how much new stuff do we actually need to be doing? Which are the audiences that we need to that we can only reach by doing new stuff, and actually are there other things we can do to reach the others, or like you said, to get people coming back? Did you find it worked? I mean, were you able to track the repeats that were coming back?
Yeah, so we had a very simplistic signing thing. So when people bought tickets, they were given like a business card ticket style thing, and they signed next to their corresponding number, and every time they came back they signed in. And so we noticed there was mixed response. We had mainly families that came back and used the children's area. So it was a free day out then for them. They'd already paid, need to pay again. They came back and they sat in the family area, did the colouring and that kind of stuff, and then went around the museum. So we found it worked, and especially for the local families. So it helped us to identify the audience in which there was a want and a need for that, and where we need to possibly increase our offer. So we'll be looking at focusing on children's activities and growing that area more to encourage those families. And it also showed that we are that type of museum that once you've been and had a look round, if you're an adult, once you've seen it all, you've seen it. There's not much more to entice you back. So we know we've got to keep updating and changing. And the example on your slide of new exhibits, to try and encourage not just people who have been existing visitors, but entice other people back. So it worked in a new number of different ways, really.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for sharing. Has anyone got any thoughts on how to decide whether or not you need to diversify and do something new, or whether there's no need to do that when it comes to getting those repeat visits in or getting new audiences in? Has anyone, what sort of factors would affect your decision making on that, would you say? Desborough Heritage Centre, yeah?
Yeah. This is really useful, because without realising it, we've been doing it. I think Jill's just put in the chat room, Jill Burdett from Desborough, that we've started a family history group over the last year. My question is, the practicalities of doing this, do you do it sort of together with a whiteboard at the committee meeting, or do you tend to give it to people beforehand and then say to people, what have you come up with? Do you know what I mean? How's the best way? Because I've never done this one before.
That's a really good question, actually. I think it slightly depends on maybe the people who you're doing it with. I think some people would feel perhaps really uncomfortable coming to a meeting and having this sprung on them, just in the meeting, right, let's sit down and think of new ideas, or what do you think, and might feel more comfortable if they have a chance to get some thoughts together beforehand. I think it's really important that anyone who takes part is on the same page, so you're really clear with what your goals are, so you can always then come back to, well, what are we trying to achieve, and also what are our parameters? So for example, we've lost half our volunteers this year, or we have no budget. Any of those things are going to determine what you're able to do, because you've got to be realistic. So I think whether you do it from scratch in the session or not, you need to definitely have introduced those parameters and those sorts of things to people beforehand, so that everyone's really clear on the purpose, the goals you want to achieve, and like I say, those limiting factors.
Yeah, so it's probably as well to introduce it before we do it. So that people are aware of what we're going to do. Yeah, got you.
It could be. I mean, it could be that on a more strategic level, for example, you decide, okay, there's this target audience group we have, and we have decided we need to do something new to cater to them. And then you get a broader group around, come up with ideas how you might reach them. So often, I think people maybe who volunteer or work front of house aren't involved in those discussions, but will actually have a really good input because they're so close to the visitors who come in. Yes. So, you know, think about who you can involve. It shouldn't necessarily just be strategic, you know, trustees or management. I'd really consider getting, you know, those people on the ground involved, because they will have great ideas. And sometimes, you know, also just doing a bit of research, because you might find that, okay, you think, right, we want to target this audience group, but we don't know what they want. We don't know how to appeal to them. So then you need to do a bit of consultation with them as part of the work.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Stephen, yes.
Sorry, yeah, sorry to monopolise. In a previous life, we used quite a lot of audience analysis. So we measured how many people, or what sort of people came to the museum, comparing to who lived in the local area, and it was interesting. That guided us on using how to whether to diversify or to develop with our existing audiences. So we thought we had a lot of older visitors coming to the museum, and we did quite well. And when we did our analysis, we realised actually there was a lot more penetration of that audience than we thought. So we were sort of saying, oh, that's fine, we cater for this audience really well, and we suddenly realised actually there's a lot more we could do. We could get a lot more of these people in. So that guided us to go down the route of developing, rather than, I mean, obviously we want new visitors, but we could do a lot of work on penetrating into our core visitors, because there were plenty of them around who we thought were interested in the museum but didn't visit. So using audience analysis sometimes can guide you which bit of the Ansoff matrix you might want to go down.
Definitely, and I would say diversification is likely to be the one that is going to cost you the most. It's likely to be the riskiest one because it involves doing new things for new people. So, you know, in a way you could say it's the holy grail, and people are always aspiring to do new things for new people. But yeah, like Stephen's point is really important. You know, don't neglect the other categories, and don't do, you know, radically different things if you don't need to. Stephen, you also had a good question in the chat, actually. Has anyone had any issues when they have diversified, perhaps from existing visitors or customers? And if so, have you got any suggestions of how that could be mitigated? So I guess if you're starting to do new things and you have quite a core loyal visitor base, and they then feel a bit, you know, uncertain of why it is that things are changing when they really like the status quo, or perhaps actually your staff and volunteers aren't sure about coming on that journey with you, things are changing. Has anyone got any examples of that? Is that anything that's affected anyone? I mean, I would say that you know, it's really important to keep your staff and volunteers on board. If you're developing things and changing things, it's really important to reassure them, and that it's not, you know, if there are areas of the museum and things that they love, it's not about you getting rid of them in order to, and getting rid of those visitors. It's just about catering to, you know, different types of visitors and getting different types of people in and more people in. And also, I think, linking to Stephen's point, if you're basing your decisions and your approach on audience data, on visitor research, it's a lot easier to justify what you're doing, because you can explain and ground your decision making in the data and in the research. So it's not just that you're going off on a whim. You know, you have found, your research has shown there is demand for this, there's a need for this, but not catering to this audience, whatever it might be, and therefore you're following the framework quite logically and catering to them.
Kirsty, I think you had your hand. Sorry to interrupt, Christina. Kirsty, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we have, like post-COVID, we started a new kind of digital plan to kind of, and especially like to attract like families, like homeschooling. And we have like a lot of schools that come in on a regular basis. And so we did kind of tutoring Tuesdays, which I thought would be like quite a popular thing, but then it didn't actually go down as well as I thought it might, because it's our digital visitors tend to be of like kind of more kind of history based older fans as opposed to our actual visitors. So there was kind of a struggle there to get the interest online that we would have done in a normal like they would come through the doors if we were open, but it was kind of harder to get them to engage with it online. It seems that our audiences are different on the two platforms.
Yeah, has anyone else found that? I mean, that's something I've heard from a lot of people, and they're not necessarily interchangeable or transferable. So people who engage with you digitally might not be interested or able to physically visit because actually they might not be based geographically close to you. Similarly, someone who physically visits you might not be interested in engaging with you digitally. Okay, I think we will just keep moving on, if that's okay, because we've still got quite a lot to get through. So, thinking then about the next step in the framework, your actions and resources. What are we going to do to get there? So some of you might have heard of the 4 Ps when it comes to marketing, which is quite an old model covering your product, your price, your place and promotion. But the Chartered Institute of Marketing has updated this now to also include people, process and physical evidence. And as a whole, as a collective, they make up the marketing mix. And I'll talk you through each step. But the main thing I think I want to get across is that marketing is more than promotion. And if you don't get the other elements right, then there's no point in throwing loads of money at promotion because no amount of money will make it work. So an example is from a museum a few years ago that I saw. They were doing a museums at night event, and it was a teddy bears picnic. So it was aimed at quite young children, but they ran it between 7 and 9 p.m. on a Friday night, which is past the bedtime of those children it would have appealed to. You know, so no amount of sort of Facebook ads or whatever it is you want to do to promote that would really get those sort of 3, 4, 5-year-olds along.
Christina, can I just jump in? I think, can we see your slides?
Oh, have they gone again?
Yes.
Okay, apologies. Okay. Thank you for flagging that.
No worries.
There we go. So that's all I was talking through. So the 7 Ps in the marketing mix. So you've got product, price, place, promotion, people, process, and physical evidence. So I'll talk you through each one. So firstly, when it comes to product, and we've actually been talking a bit about products, so you're likely to have many different products. So it might be your temporary exhibitions, your events, friend scheme, your cafe, your merchandise. So the key here is really thinking about what your audiences need, what they want, what they expect, both now and in the future, to make sure they'll meet a demand. So like the Chartered Institute of Marketing says, we must give our customers what they want, not what we think they want. So if you don't know what they want, you know, think about seeing if you can do a bit of research or consultation with them. And I think a couple of the comments in the chat have already alluded to this, that chances are what your audiences might want and expect and need now and next year might be quite different to a year ago. So thinking about the price, it's really important where, you know, chances are even if you're free to enter, that some of your products, you know, you will sell something, whether it's a coffee or a guidebook or something. So it's important that your audiences feel they're getting good value for money. And it's about them feeling they're paying good value. It's not necessarily about being the cheapest per se. It's worth remembering that generally, the higher the price you charge, the higher a customer's expectations. So, you know, if you're charging more money, think about how you can make sure that you're offering that quality experience for them. Also, some customers are more price sensitive than others. So, you know, if you're increasing your prices, you might find that doesn't affect some visitors or customers, whereas others that, you know, perhaps what you might perceive to be quite a small price increase will be enough to put them off. And interestingly, generally, this is a generalization, but generally existing customers are less price sensitive than new ones. So that means that generally your existing customers, providing, you know, they like what you do and like the experience, are less likely to be put off by an increase in price than new ones, because new ones have yet to experience you. So, you know, a small price hike might be then enough to put them off. Thinking about the third element, place. Think about how your product's distributed to the customer. It needs to be available in the right place and the right time for them. Now, obviously, your museum is fixed, so its location is fixed. You can't change that. But you can do things, perhaps not currently, but generally you can do things in other locations as well. So you can run outreach sessions, you can have pop-up museums, you know, in your shopping centre, at community fairs, and you can do digital and online events as well. So consider where and how you sell tickets as well, and membership and merchandise. And I know a lot of organisations now, not museums, that are looking at setting up online shops and really thinking about how they can sell online as a result of coronavirus. Promotion, this is the one that often people will jump straight in with, and without having done any of the other steps before and any of that thinking, they'll say, we need to be on TikTok, we need to do a Facebook ad. So I'd urge you to resist that temptation and really think about the other steps first. So do the situational analysis, do your goals, think about your approach before you go anywhere near the promotional activities. So this is all about communicating what you do and what you offer. And you really want to match your channels to your audiences. So there's no point in putting your time, effort, money into a channel where actually none of your audiences are. Make sure that your messages, so what it is you're trying to tell them, that resonates with your audiences. So the language you use, the images, and the tone of voice. And I think that's something that's really important at the minute. And what we've seen over the last few months is that ability to sort of read the room, so really understand how your audiences are feeling. You know, do they want a jokey, irreverent post, or will that actually, you know, that might provide a nice bit of distraction from the doom and gloom this year, or that might land really badly and they think actually that's really crass and that's not the, you know, now's not the time or the place. And also remember that communication is really a two-way process. So it's not just about you talking at audiences and talking at people on social media. It's really about you listening and inviting conversation in and questions with them. So consider things like, why do you want to communicate? Who do you want to communicate to? What is it you're trying to tell them? And how are you going to do it? And how are you going to distribute that message? So who are you going to contact, or how are you going to use those channels? So then the new ones, people. I don't think I need to tell you, you know, your organisation's people are so incredibly valuable in so many ways. In terms of marketing, they really represent your museum and can have an enormous impact on customer satisfaction. And there are so many potential interactions with visitors and with audiences that your staff, your volunteers, your trustees will have. You know, anything from a welcome greeting to assisting someone who's maybe got some additional needs or needs help with wayfinding, selling things in the shop, just providing information and directions, or you know, being tour guides. And your people can really be brand advocates and museum champions, you know, outside their sort of hours, they're with you as well. Process is the penultimate one. So this is really the process and systems that essentially deliver a product to a customer. It's like the whole customer journey. So if you think about first, okay, someone's not heard of your museum. So first you want them to be aware of your museum or your organisation. The next step might be, okay, they're going to consider, do they want to visit? Do they want to attend one of your virtual events? Do they want to buy something from you online? Then they'll make a decision. Then they'll, well, here I've got visit, but it might just be purchase or attend an online event. The next step is the retention and the advocacy, which is really, really the holy grail if you can get there. So not only do you want a customer or audience or visitor to have that experience with you, you want them to keep coming back and then ultimately to advocate for you, to therefore start someone else's journey with you. So this whole process should be really pleasant, really user-friendly, really seamless. And try to put yourself in your customers' shoes. You know, it should be really easy for them to find information about when you're open, what it costs, how to get there, what sort of facilities you have, all those things that they might need to make a decision at the outset. And then physical evidence. So these are really the elements of the physical environment that customers experience. And if someone hasn't been to you before, it can be, I mean, risky is maybe a bit of a strong word, but it is quite a commitment. You know, it's time out of their busy lives and it's money. So if they're unfamiliar with you, you know, they have to really weigh up how likely do they think it is that you will meet their needs and they will have a good time. How can you minimize this risk? So there are things you can do. So, you know, if you're on a high street and a lot of people pass by, you can make sure you have a really nice, welcoming entrance area. So every time people walk past, they think, oh, that looks nice, I might pop in. The photos you use and marketing materials are really important. So pre-coronavirus, you know, I might advise you to have lots of pictures with people in, you know, places looking really busy, really vibrant, really fun. Now, actually, you might want to do a bit of an audit on all your website and your social media channels. And if you've got any pictures of queues or reams of people attending an event from maybe last year or previously, you might want to take them off and refresh them with pictures that maybe just very clearly show a smaller number of visitors that are socially distanced and perhaps wearing a mask as well. You can also do things like share positive reviews that people have left. Cresswell Crags have been doing that loads. They've been getting some amazing reviews on TripAdvisor about their COVID-safe tours and visitor experience, and that really helps to reassure people. And I think that's more important than ever currently. And also just having that key information on your museum's website. And once you've considered the 7 Ps of the marketing mix, think about resources. So, you know, think about who's going to be responsible, who's going to be involved. Think about the timings for any of those actions you're going to be doing and the budget, and also any risk factors that you might want to consider and just be aware of. So sometimes you might find you have a budget and that will determine and steer what marketing activities you do. Sometimes you'll find it's the other way around, that the activities may determine the budget. So you decide what you need to do and then you need to price that up, or it might be sort of a mix of the two. So the last point in the framework is just evaluation. How will we know if we've got there? So if you've got really clear goals and objectives at the start, that will definitely make this step easier. I'd say firstly, don't just see evaluation as something you do at the end of a financial year or an end of a calendar year. Try to just monitor regularly to keep an eye on what you're doing, to make sure you're on track, and really not wasting time or money. Because if you're putting money into something and you find quite early on it's not working, then you can obviously rethink what it is you're doing. As I mentioned, having clear goals and smart marketing objectives make it easier. So if you had one of those smart objectives from earlier, it should be quite easy to measure whether or not you've achieved it. I would say focus on evaluating really key areas rather than trying to evaluate everything. You know, what metrics are important to you? If you've got clear goals, then that should be a really useful guide as to what you need to evaluate. You know, think about what sort of thing funders might need. Think about future funding applications, maybe, you know, what sort of information you might need to evidence in that. But mainly also think about what information you will use. You know, there's no point in collecting this data if you're not going to do anything with it. So I'd really encourage you to share the results of evaluation with your team, and importantly then do something with it. So if something's working really well, keep going. If something's not, change it, or at least try to unpick why it's not working. So are there any questions on that? I saw a comment in the chat about the people being most important. I think that's a really good point, and really such a valuable side. And I think when it comes to museums, it's quite interesting because some of these areas, I think a lot of people wouldn't put under marketing. So people, you know, you wouldn't necessarily call that marketing, and you might think about that as visitor services, or in bigger organisations sitting under some kind of HR function. Similarly, the product side of the marketing mix might sit with your programming team or your events team or whoever's responsible for that. It doesn't really matter. Just I think the main thing is just trying to consider all areas and not just the promotion side. Okay, so just coming towards the end, I wanted to talk a bit about sort of coronavirus and the disruption we faced on so many levels this year and the impact that's had on marketing. So I've been thinking quite a lot about various things that I think have been impacting marketing and communications for museums. So a lot of them are positive, actually. And I think this year's definitely seen a lot more digital engagement by organisations. And also, I think, a change in how organisations perceive the point of digital communication and engagement. So I think a lot of people last year were just seeing it as a means to driving physical visits to your organisation, to your venue, to your museum. Whereas now I think people are realising that actually digital engagement is a positive thing in itself, even if it doesn't lead to visits. You know, you are then sharing your collections and your knowledge with people just in a different way. And I think we've seen incredible reinvention, flexibility, experimentation from organisations. There's obviously been the need for quite a lot of crisis communication. I think also a lot of museums have really played to their strengths as sort of community hubs or centres in their communities, both physically and also online, kind of really anchoring people together. And I think what's been really important is relationships not being transactional, you know, that really we value communications and human relationships with each other, and that the trust that comes from really authentic relationships, and also the importance of tone and empathy, like I mentioned earlier. And I think on a sort of practical level, I think there's a lot coming out of this. Lucy and I were talking slightly early this morning, for example, about the need to monetize digital content. So many museums have been doing amazing things free of charge, but definitely a lot of the conversations I'm having now, people involve how do we monetize digital content, doing live and online events, also obviously the need for those of you who have reopened to have pre-bookable visits. That's just kind of becoming the norm, and visitors are becoming used to that and accepting that. Also the growth of e-commerce, so shop sales as well, and that really the importance of having different income streams and not just being reliant on visitors through the door. And I think there's also a few sort of trends of 2020 that I think are going to have a really long-lasting impact, and we haven't seen all of it yet. So a few months ago, after the Black Lives Matter movement came to prominence, really, over 1,000 big organisations vowed to either for the month of July, or actually in some cases like Unilever for the rest of the year, to stop advertising on some social media platforms, primarily Facebook and Instagram, but also Twitter in some cases. I've only come across one museum that decided to take that step, which was the Imperial War Museum. I'd be really interested to hear if anyone else knows of any other museums that did that, or if you considered it. But I think sort of linked to my next point about, you know, a lot of museums have been making statements about diversity and their commitments to diversity. And I think there will be more discussions to be had about what that means and how authentic that can be. So, for example, you know, if an organisation makes a statement around diversity and Black Lives Matter, but then they put advertising into Facebook, which a lot of people feel is a platform that has not yet tackled hate speech and hate crime, you know, is there a bit of an issue there, and will you be held to account by that? Because we're definitely seeing, especially on Twitter, but on Facebook as well, museums are being held to account a lot more by activists and interested members of their community. And I think all of this has really led to just the need to be really agile and nimble when it comes to your marketing and what you do, and be really open to change. So some of sort of tips I'd say on staying agile amongst the chaos, really linking back to where we started. So try to anchor everything you do in that purpose and mission, because I think that will help you to avoid steering off course and get distracted with other things if you can really be focused on what you're doing. I mean, I've put here, sort your admin out. What I mean by that is just be really clear on all the behind the scenes stuff, so responsibilities, but also little things like logins to Google Analytics or social media channels, so that if people are suddenly ill or having to quarantine or away, you know, it's really clear, someone else can pick up and know exactly where they've left off. Definitely monitor and fine tune what you're doing as you go along. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, see your marketing strategy and plan just as a living, breathing document, because you might have to adapt it as you go along. Be really mindful of the public mood, you know, reflect and listen on what's happening. Certainly, you know, something that helps is putting any time or money into more digital channels than print, because it's a lot easier to change that overnight. And you might find that if you are open, but you know, you're having to change your opening hours regularly because maybe your staff and volunteers sort of numbers are dipping and rising quite sporadically, or because you're potentially subject to localized lockdowns, you might find that you just want to have your homepage is where you have your opening hours, and all other your whole other web presence you just signpost to either your phone line where you can have a recorded message or your website homepage, and they are then the two places that you update regularly. So you don't find that if you're changing your opening hours regularly, you're having to, you know, log into TripAdvisor and Facebook and Twitter to change all those channels. That can become quite onerous. Equally, obviously, there's a risk that, you know, not all of your audiences are connecting to you digitally. So you need to just think about how you're going to stay engaged with and reach those who aren't on social media, for example. And that's something we'll talk a bit more about in the session next week when we're talking about engagement with audiences. I would say manage expectations, and by that I mean everyone's expectations. So manage visitors' expectations if things have changed, in terms of, you know, they can no longer touch some of the interactives or do some of the fancy dress that, you know, the children maybe used to love. Be really clear about that so they know what to expect. I'd also say, you know, manage your own team and your own organisation's expectations, because I think there's a big emotional, you know, it's emotionally draining this year, and you are going to be probably sent, you know, there's so many other tasks that everyone's having to do. So it might mean that actually the amount of time you've got to dedicate to marketing isn't what you had a year ago. And linked to that, I'd say, you know, be kind to yourselves in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And, you know, I'd say give yourselves a pat on the back just for getting this far and getting through the last few months, because they're really, really tough. So don't put too much pressure on yourselves in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And yeah, because it is really, really tough. So I said to Lucy I didn't want to end on a negative. I thought it'd be really interesting to sort of just reflect a bit back and think if there are any positives that have been for your marketing in the last year. So if you go to menti.com again, either on your phones or on your desktops, and use the same code, you can then type in, it's a open question, so you can just type in if you've had any thoughts on what positives there have been for marketing in 2020, because it'd be, I think, nice to end on something quite positive and interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Great, so it's given some time and space to reevaluate purpose and direction. Excellent. Try new things with lockdown, yeah. Reimagine projects and to achieve value, people stuck at home value online content offered more. That's a good point, yeah. That's fantastic. Public support has been fantastic. Visitors keen to get behind you. Massive upswell in positivity. Try new things. Online shop focus, which has generated some income whilst we're closed. That's excellent. Lots of potential partners. This is really encouraging, actually, to see some of these comments, all these comments coming through. National campaigns to get on board with. opportunity to rethink the whole heritage offer.
Someone who hasn't been able to get into Menti is saying there's a positive in that they've been trying new things and developing their website and getting out into the community more as well.
Brilliant. Embrace digital technology more. I mean, this is an amazing set of positives, actually. That's really encouraging that it's not all doom and gloom, and you're able to sort of seize those opportunities, thinking back to the SWOT analysis. Responding better than ever to lead positive TripAdvisor reviews. Yeah, this is something I've heard. I think so many visitors are so grateful now. So sort of a trip to a museum might be something that people took for granted in the past, and really it wasn't necessarily really seen as that an amazing day out, you know, unless maybe it was a big trip to London and a national. Now people are so, you know, effectively grateful for that opportunity, and for you and your teams for opening up the buildings. And I think that enrichment of a real life experience that's not screen based is you know, really positive. Fabulous. Oh, that's really good. Okay. So that's the end of the presentation. So for the last few minutes, I thought it'd be an opportunity to talk if there are any questions or any reflections on anything we have covered today.
Just picking up, Christina, that Kirsty from the last point, Kirsty said that they managed a digital festival and reached a worldwide audience, which I'm presuming is a new audience. That sounds really impressive.
That might be, Kirsty, do you want to, is that something you'd be happy to unmute yourself for and just say a couple of words on to everyone, because that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so we usually do at Bosworth Battlefield, we have the medieval festival every year to celebrate the Battle of Bosworth that happened on the 22nd of August. So this year was the first year we've not done it in many years, and so I still wanted to like keep the momentum up. So the facilitators that we usually book, we had them to we got them to film like bits. We had people doing medieval cooking demonstrations. The staff ourselves, we did a recreation. We filmed the recreation of the Battle of Bosworth, which got a lot of likes. And so we did online competitions. I created kind of a lot of quizzes that people could get involved in, and I did a whole week of things actually instead of just a weekend. So it brought a lot of people in, and I had people messaging me saying they'd get up. They were in Canada and they got up at 5 a.m. in the morning just so they could watch it. So yeah, it was really good. I think it has created definitely a rod for my own back, because I think now we've realized that next year, even if the physical event does go ahead, we definitely need more of a digital presence, because a lot of people were saying this has actually been better for us because we would never be able to actually visit in reality, but we're really happy that we got to experience this. So yeah, I think it's definitely made us realize that actually there is a digital audience that may never materialize into like an actual audience, but they still want to be able to kind of engage with us in some ways. So yeah, definitely.
And were all of those events free of charge, or did you charge for any of them?
No, this year we did everything completely free of charge. So we had a live from a couple of authors as well that went down really well. But I think those kind of elements, I think we would definitely maybe put in a charge for in the future if we were to do it again. So maybe we could, like, it made me think about maybe if we have the physical event on, we could film it and get like film it live, but get people to book on and that way. But yeah, no, this year it was free access to everything. So it went quite well. So
brilliant. There's someone put in the chat as well that they watched some of it, which was really very good. So that's great to hear.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you, Kate.
Has anyone has anyone charged for anything they have done online? Any sort of talk, any workshop or anything like that? Because that'd be really interesting to hear from you if you have, because I know a lot of people are considering how they might be able to generate some income through doing online events. Has anyone tried that yet? No, I think there are some case studies and resources that are starting to come out. I think everyone's at the early stages of this at the minute, so I don't think anyone's necessarily cracked it, but I think people are starting to dabble with it. And I was saying to Lucy earlier about how I think it's a little bit like when some of the newspapers that early on, quite a few years ago, started putting their content behind a paywall, and many people were really skeptical about that and whether that would work as a business model, whereas actually some of those organisations that have done that are very strong financially now compared to those that are more reliant on advertising income. And I think what helps is when there's a bit of a sort of step change and it becomes the norm. And I think that is what we're starting to see now, that a lot more organisations are realising that it's not sustainable to keep putting free content out there, and they need to start charging for it. And again, a bit like how visitors are now expecting to pre-book before they visit the venue, hopefully in the coming months they'll also expect to pay for some of the online content that organisations are generating. Donation, that's a good point actually, to offer that as an opportunity as well, rather than charging, especially if you want to make sure that what you do is accessible to everyone. Someone's mentioned a case study talk from Jane Austen's House Online Literature Festival. Brilliant. Stephen's saying significant income from donating online. Oh, well, that's excellent. Yeah, that's really good. Are there any other reflections or any other questions from what we've been covering today? Because otherwise, I thought for those of you planning on coming to the session next week, which will be about re-engaging with your audiences, if you have any particular issues or challenges or any questions that you'd like to see us cover in that session, feel free to pop them in the chat now, and then I'll make a note of them and make sure that obviously we're tailoring the content and session to you as much as possible. So if you've got any specific questions on audience engagement for next week, do feel free to put them in the chat, or you can message me privately as well if you prefer.
Big thank you to Christina. And to remind you all that we'll be sharing the slides and the recordings, and it would be wonderful if you would complete the evaluation as well, which Stephen will be sending around. And next week we will be running the session on re-engaging your audiences, and that's next week, Tuesday the 13th at the same time, 10:30. So I hope to see many of you there.